Much. Now, as I said, my next guest is one of the four individuals who made up the Battleground Melbourne group who spoke at this year's CPAC conference. And they shared all their different and incredible stories about living in one of the world's most locked, or the world's most locked down cities. Many Melburnians were subject to the difficulties of living without work, without loved ones, without support. But the Andrews government's overreach, particularly with its law enforcement arm, Victoria Police, shocked the entire world. As I've shown you many times on this show and on Outsiders, the way the authorities in this country treated their own citizens, particularly in Victoria, those citizens who rejected the oppressive rules being placed upon them, as is your right within any democracy, they were treated as pariahs, they were treated with brutality, in the most disgusting scenes. Well, joining me now, we've shown you these scenes, but now I'm introducing you to someone who was there firsthand and unfortunately has the bruises to show for it. Matt Lawson, great to see you. How are you, Matt?
Hi, Rowan. Yeah, no, I'm doing okay at the moment. Thanks for having me on tonight to talk about what happened.
Okay, well, tell us your story, your experiences during the coronavirus lockdown and how you wound up. You were a photographer, you were unable to work, you got fed up with the government overreach, you joined the demonstrations, you ended up with the most horrific bruises. We've got photos which will show of after you were rubber bulleted by Dan Andrews police goons. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I was just a Victorian dad worker, and I started to see what was happening with the overreach from the government, started to research for myself, and then eventually was able to go out and go to some of these protests to see what it was all about. While I was there, I witnessed that the protesters in general were people that were losing jobs, parents who were worried about their kids missing school. And yeah, I attended quite a few protests throughout 2021. And on this fateful day, it was August 21st, 2021, protest was moving through the city. We were walking up Flinders Street and there was a bit of a fracas. There was a group of police officers stopping people from walking through. And at all the events that I've been to, I've actually built up a bit of a relationship with the police and acted as sort of a middle ground between the police and the people, trying to make sure everyone had safe passage. And at this particular protest, I was up the front and saw the police had what looked like pepper ball weapons in their hands, and I merely had my phone in one hand and had my other hand in the air and approached them saying, "What is that? You're not going to shoot that?" Because I knew on that particular day in Victoria, the school grounds had just been closed down to the children. And I knew there were parents and pregnant women in the crowd. So as I approached and said, "You're not going to do that," I was about 4 meters away with one arm in the air and my phone in the other hand. And I got shot with the pepper ball rounds. Sort of went to ground, stood back up, and I actually said, "Do it again," because I didn't think they would. It was an adrenaline thing. And I got hit by a large, what they call a beanbag round, a baton round, right in the middle of the stomach. And it knocked the wind out of me. And that's where all the bruising came from. And from there, the crowd sort of dispersed. But there was no real warning given. There was a police officer that basically antagonized people and said, "Come on, pussies, we're going to shoot this, or we're going to look after you now." And it all happened so quickly, but not something I would ever think would happen in Victoria or Australia. It sort of blew away my mind. Like I couldn't understand what was going on, and I was in a lot of shock at the time.
Matt, I've spoken on this show to many Australians who suffered, the emotional trauma of what they went through during lockdown, and particularly people who chose not to get vaccinated. They were treated as lepers, often by family, often certainly by neighbours who dogged them in. There's all this sort of stuff. The emotional scars are horrific. Sadly, people have taken their own lives, we understand, due to lockdowns and due to the demonisation of people for being unvaccinated. But you suffered the physical harm of it as well. You actually were very ill. You were in hospital. We saw that photo there for quite some time. And as you told us at CPAC, you were, still unable to move physically and move your arm and so on for a long time. How are you now?
It's ongoing. The physical problems that I had initially were it was a large hematoma, tear in my abdomen, 5 centimeters long by 2 centimeters wide. That took about 2 to 3 months to subside, and from there on I've had heartburn continually. I'm someone who's always been fit and healthy, but I've had heartburn continually, been in and out of hospital. On top of that, the mental side of it, so anxiety, a loss of trust in our police force, which I've always been a person, who's gone over and shook their hands, and my children would always go over and give them a high five, and it's kind of eroded that trust. And I think, on top of that, I also have platforms where I've been speaking out, where I'm hearing from other people about their trauma as well. So it's sort of been a bit of a snowball effect of everything together. But physically, it's still just the heartburn at the moment, and the mental side of it's much worse. Like replaying it over and over again in my head. Could things have happened in a different way? I always think that the police have discretionary powers, and there should be a thought process of what kind of threat is there compared to how much force we have to use. And in this instance, I think they well and truly overreacted.
Matt, you mentioned could things have happened in a different way? Well, the tragedy is, yes, they should have happened in a completely different way. Only a couple of weeks ago on the show, I interviewed Rob Roos, the European Member of Parliament. His questioning of Pfizer in the European Parliament shows that Pfizer themselves never tested for transmission, and in fact, we now know that the vaccines don't stop transmission to the extent it was said. So therefore, you didn't need to go through all this. Nor did any of those people who marched, nor did any of those people who lost their jobs because they weren't vaccinated, nor did any of those people who lost family members or couldn't go and see a lost loved one or whatever else. All those stories in the sliding doors other world need never have happened because the vaccines do not stop transmission, as we were told was the reason for the mandatory vaccination. So all of that, Matt, as Rob has told us, didn't need to happen, which is heartbreaking. But I just wonder, before we go, you mentioned the police and your relationship with the police. There is a good end to this story. You have very impressively got involved with the Victorian Police. Now, you are now working with them to ensure that this can never, ever happen again. Is that correct?
Yeah, so at the start of October, we went to file the papers for a court case against what happened. As part of that, we wanted to open conversation about what happened here in this instance and how we can prevent this kind of thing from happening again in the future. Unfortunately, at that time, the Vic government came back to us and said that they couldn't talk to us until 8 weeks later, which was coincidentally 1 week after the election. So we filed the lawsuit now. It's going through. But on the side of that, I've actually talked to some senior constables at other protests who are very much aware that the police force has been politicised in this instance, and they want to have discussions where we can help the youth of the police force understand what's going on and how desperate the people are who are in these protest situations, so that hopefully moving forwards the trust can be rebuilt and this type of situation doesn't ever happen again in Victoria or Australia.
Matt Lawson, thank you so much for your time. And if people want to watch Battleground Melbourne or Battleground Melbourne Live, they are both online. Look for them and you will find them.